Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session on Profit and Planet, the new sustainability paradigm. In a nutshell, we are going to discuss new ways of doing business within planetary boundaries, and more specifically, we are trying to think about alternative business models that reduce environmental footprints, and at the same time, this is important, have economic benefits. The need to do business within planetary boundaries, I think, is becoming apparent to ensure the survival of humanity and ultimately the planet. For example, planetary boundaries have been crossed for climate, chemical pollution, and biodiversity. And to address this urgency, I think businesses must find ways to realign their operations with this new reality. And it's really great to see so many people here, and I thank you warmly for attending this session. My name is Halbheer. I'm a professor in HEC Paris, and I'm sponsored by the FII Institute. My research is on circular business models. And to learn actually what businesses are doing in the real world, I have a great pleasure to introduce our outstanding panelists. First, we have Ashraf Al-Ghazzawi. Is the VP Strategy and Market Analysis at Saudi Aramco. Cyril Courjaret, CEO of Suez International. François, SVP Refining and Petrochemical for the regions Africa, Middle East, Asia. And SVP Strategy and Growth at TotalEnergies. And finally, we have Laura Marie Töpfer, a partner at Extantia Capital. And here, because this is an HEC-powered session, we have a special guest from HEC, also Antoine Moussa, CEO and shareholder at PPX. Now, in our conversation for the next 50 minutes, we will focus on three main topics. Number one is the energy transition. Number two is circular approaches in business model design. And the third topic is about novel technologies to deal with environmental footprints from the past. And I would like to open the discussion and hear our panelists' perspectives on these topics. And maybe first, Ashraf, if you want to say a few words about, the opportunities for Saudi Aramco in this changing world that is headed towards net zero emissions in 2050.
Thank you, Daniel. Let me start by saying that net zero and energy transition, without a doubt, it's the conversation that is helping define and shape the energy industry going forward. That being said, we want to guard against simplifying energy transition or net zero as simply shifting away from hydrocarbons or oil and gas resources. If you look at global energy demand for up to the year 2050, there are reports out there that talks about demand increasing all the way to 47%. If we look at renewable resources today, they are about 2.5% to 3% of the global energy mix. You account for all the economic development and economic growth going forward. Even the most optimistic plans going there looks at renewable mix of anywhere between 20 to maybe 35 to 40%. What does that mean to us? It means that going forward, as the world moves into a more decarbonization of its economies, we still need an energy mix of all possible resources, not only focusing on one and not versus the other. You talked about opportunities for Saudi Aramco. We firmly believe that Aramco is a unique position in terms of leading in the transition and the net zero journey. Why do I say this? You look at Aramco today, it is the lowest emission barrels produced, it's the lowest carbon footprint, the lowest methane intensity, and it's also the lowest cost. You look at all aspects that we have recently disclosed in terms of decarbonization, because we also announced our net zero plans for the year 2050. Just like many industries, some of it are represented here in the panel, we're going to be looking at all possible levers to decarbonize our operations. We're going to look at carbon capture and sequestration. We're going to look at renewables. We're looking at efficiencies as well as reductions of emissions in addition to offsets. And all of these tools that are available for us, we believe that Aramco, with its unique position in terms of low cost and low emission position, is really in a unique position to lead in the energy transition narrative and the path ahead.
Well, François, maybe if you could explain how you perceive the energy transition at TotalEnergies and how basically your company can provide green energy solutions for those companies who want to decarbonize their supply chains.
First, let me thank you for inviting me to this panel. I would say that we are facing a massive challenge. It's what you have expressed in your introduction and what was said also by Ashraf. We see an increasing demand in energy, while at the same time we have to decarbonize. So it's really a difficult challenge. And as TotalEnergies now, we have decided to change deeply, and that's why we changed the name, but it's not only a name change, it's also really behind that a deep change in the business model, also in helping everyone, including all the employees, to adapt to this new change. And we see clearly a rebalance of the mix. At first, we invest massively in developing renewable energy, like solar on wind. So we target 35 gigawatts in 2025, but it's already secure. And if you look at what it was 5 years ago, it was very, very little, close to 1 gigawatt in 2015. So now 35 gigawatts is really massive. That's one. Secondly, gas is the energy for the transition. We really develop gas. Today it was last year 40% of our portfolio. It will be 50% of our portfolio in 2030. Why? Because it helps to phase out coal and it helps to cope with intermittency of renewables. And then we have also, of course, oil. We need oil in the energy mix. We cannot say it's one or the other, it's all of them. So we need to further develop oil resources. And on top of this, I would say some new molecules like hydrogen, biofuel, biogas. All this is a new mix that we are developing.
Well, thank you so much, and maybe Laura Marie, if you can say a few words about the energy transition from an investor's point of view, and how can you, as an investor, actually move the needle on climate change?
Yeah, sure, happy to. I mean, we are a decarbonization technology investor, right? And so the biggest inflection point this year was the energy crisis. And I think that's made one thing in particular crystal clear. The green premium is a real thing, right? So nobody is willing to pay more for green energy. So if we're serious about the energy transition, in my mind, we have to maybe rethink the green premium as an innovation premium. And so what I mean by that, right, is just like any innovation, the cost going up is temporary, not fixed. Think of the PC, think of the iPhone. We're all willing to pay more initially and then over time expect costs to go down, right? Costs to normalize. Green energy is no different. And so, I listened earlier to lots of esteemed colleagues on the macro outlook, and it all sounded pretty gloomy actually. Not so sure I agree entirely with that. Because yes, inflation's high, some 10% year on year expected, but that also means that some of the largest asset owners, like sovereign funds, like pension funds, are looking for higher returns, and so are looking to venture capital, clean energy innovations to place their money. And so I would say, having said that, not all tech is created equal though. What matters most in my mind is their time value of carbon. So meaning that just like in finance, you can do discounted cash flow analysis, right? You can do your DCF on carbon too, so where 1 ton of CO2 saved today is worth more than 1 ton of CO2 saved tomorrow. So we need to back more transition technologies. Think of sustainable aviation fuels. That's also energy. And why is that important? And we have a couple of those obviously here on the table. Is we can help the largest emitters with the biggest P&Ls decarbonize their existing businesses faster. Now that sounds like something that's really good to the planet, but above all, it sounds like a great business. So I think the assumptions may be a bit off. I would say that there's no two-pocket thinking, right? You either respect planetary boundaries, I think was the title of the session, or you restrict your business. Fixing the planet simply is good business.
All right, so you were mentioning, Ashraf, decarbonizing supply chains, and I'm passing the ball to Cyril. Maybe he can say some words about how Suez is tackling, its carbon emissions along its supply chain?
Yes, so first of all, very happy to be here and thank you for the invitation. When I talk to my friends, they tell me how lucky I am to work for a company working for the environment. So embedded, I would say, within the climate change mitigation process. But still, I believe that we need to do much more, and that we are working heavily to do much more. In three particular fields, I would say, I will take three examples. The first one is the energy optimization efficiency, because we do believe that the processes that we have built over the years are not efficient enough. And if I take an example, over the last 4 years, we have been able in our concession of Macau to reduce by 20% the consumption of energy, just by improving the processes we were used to apply for decades. The second point, which is very important, is the performance of the network, the water network. Because each liter that you save within the network, it's an equivalent saved in terms of energy, in terms of chemicals, in terms of a lot of costs and products that would be helpful to promote the extension of the life of the planet. And the third example I would use is the massive use of renewable energy on our plants. And I just take the example of the desal plant of Melbourne in Australia, where 100% of the energy that is used, and we know that the desal plant have massive energy consumption, and therefore 100% of the energy is based on renewable. So three simple examples of the way we can help developing this mitigation.
All right, I think this is an interesting point because I'm sometimes still surprised to see that cost-cutting sustainability is actually possible, that there is room to reduce the energy consumption or emissions just by becoming more efficient. And now, moving over to construction, maybe Antoine, can you say a few words about energy-positive buildings and how your company delivers buildings to customers that do not consume energy?
Thank you, Daniel. Good afternoon, everyone. Actually, doing a positive energy building is something is very simple and feasible today. We are doing it. Simply, you have to think at the initial stage of your design. With the design itself, with design method, construction method, material are using, and on top of all this, you have to work with some technology providers to have a building that can produce, store, and use its own energy. This one, we are lucky to be at the beginning of the value chain, just after the investors, where you have a huge task, definitely to convince your investors that you have to spend more at the beginning of the project, okay, to save it at the end. Then we work also with the builders to complete, the installation, and at the end we have some educational work to work with the end users. Here, in our building projects as PPX, we provide the users with an application where the user at any time see his own consumption, compare it to the average of the building itself and compare it to the average of the region. And he understands that when he just exceeds the average of the region, he will be taxed. He will pay for his own consumption. Otherwise, while he will stay within the limit, all his consumption will be paid by the building itself. So it's basically, we are connecting the whole supply chain from the investor to the end user to help them with these interconnections, okay, with the whole help and support of technology providers to have, positive energy with zero electricity invoice at the end of the month.
I think Antoine just raised a beautiful point in that, like thinking about the end product and then folding back about how to design these objects is basically a way of clever thinking. And I think one particular instance where you can see this when you think about circular supply chains, and what I really find interesting about these approaches is that, there are two ways to tap into new sources of revenue, either through extending product life or basically finding ways to recover and recycle end-of-life products. And maybe when we start about discussing about this topic, maybe Laura Marie, if you want to say a few words, because you mentioned before fixing the planet can be good business, and I think circular approaches are a leading example in that domain. And maybe you can explain how you think businesses can tap into new sources of revenue by going circular.
Yeah, sure, happy to do that, Daniel. I think, Cyril, you mentioned it earlier, right? It's not just about cost, it's about greater efficiency. And so, take waste and carbon itself, for example. It's this stuff that we think of as the bad stuff can actually be the new raw material. So, for example, take the energy crisis again, right? If you don't have Russian gas, you have waste, and you can make electricity from waste. So, a great example, for instance, Israeli tech company Lumi, they developed a new type of heat engine that drives up efficiency by around 25% in the heat recovery market. Completely unfeasible beforehand. Right? So you can now valorize excess heat. And if there's excess heat, companies will want to capture it because you can make more electricity. Same kind of logic applies to carbon itself, right? So if you think of entirely new category leaders and industries emerging in that space, like direct air capture, that sucks carbon out of the air and binds it. Take Climeworks or Repair, for example, are great examples. Because they then again enable other industries, like for instance, sustainable aviation fuels. Look to Germany. German company Ineratec makes sustainable aviation fuels, taking captured carbon and hydrogen as a feedstock, so you can produce sustainable fuels without needing to change infrastructure. So my point is, if you think of the business of circularity, to me that's about placing different bets across the hydrocarbons map in a way that they can actually speak to each other and enable each other, so you can transform the whole hydrocarbons economy. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me, and I hope this goes for you as well. And now, when we dive deeper into this circularity idea, I think Antoine can further kind of illustrate that idea in construction, where kind of extending the loop means giving buildings a second life. Or if you think about closing the loop, is how do you kind of dismantle buildings when they reach their end of life? And there's a lot of things, again, that can be done in this design stage. So you need to anticipate that. And maybe Antoine, if you want to say a few words about this.
So I believe that buildings were always done to have a second life. If you just take an example like Paris, more than 70% of the projects in Paris are related to renovation. Only 30% or less for new constructions. So now, the further step that we are taking, we are planning the project since the initial stage to be fully recycled, to reuse all materials that you are using during construction. Even though today, some suppliers, you have some new platforms for recycled material, construction material. Today you can have recycled brick to use it in new construction with the same efficiency or even sometimes as higher. So our role as designer, that since the early stage of our design, we work with manufacturers to have the construction system itself recyclable, where you can dismantle the building and rebuild it somewhere else after 5 or 10 years. We have been asked to do a project right now, last week actually, in Saudi Arabia. The project will stay 5 years in its place, and it will be totally shifted to another place, okay, with another function in another area. So this type of thinking today, Saudi Arabia is one of the pioneers in this thinking. We did many examples in France for the Olympic Games and other places, but here in Saudi Arabia we see it more and more. The clients are demanding to have it in both sides, from construction point of view, to have a movable building, and from the material inside to have recyclable material and avoid any chemical that you will face a challenge to recycle it.
That's beautiful, and I think we can build on Cyril's earlier contribution where he mentioned, managing water networks in a clever way helps to bring down operation costs and emissions. And I also, like when you bring the circular thinking to the table, you can do more with water, I think, right?
Yes, if we talk about water, obviously the objective is to preserve the resources, and by recycling the wastewater, the treated wastewater, we have a wonderful example of what we can do. And the region is on the top of is leading the world regarding recycling the wastewater, recycling wastewater for irrigation, for many uses that can avoid using the natural water resource. We are, how to say that? We are ready to go for recycled water for potable use. But the psychological effect of that is not yet done. There are some countries where it is already the case, especially in Namibia, for example, where there is no water, so recycled water is part of the creation of the potable water. But elsewhere, the reuse for agriculture and industry should be much more developed. One example on that, the largest wastewater treatment plant of the whole region is in Cairo, Gabal El Asfar, and about half of the production of the treated water goes for farms in order to develop agriculture. And at the same time, 65% of the own consumption of the plant is own created energy through the biogas production. And if I talk about waste, I don't want to talk any longer about waste. Actually, I'm talking now about transforming waste into energy and transforming waste into new material. And just as an example, in France we are able to produce 45,000 tons a year of recycled plastic for new bottles for water. So this is an example of the circular economy that we can. All the businesses, the businesses are not ready yet. We still are finding which are the clear business model on some of the recycle. But the path is ongoing and nothing will stop it.
I think that's a beautiful way to see things on the horizon. I think, Ashraf, you're in the same situation that water and waste are key environmental footprints of your business.
Oh, absolutely. I think, fortunately, we do happen to have a good track record in terms of water use in particular. I'd say that for us in Aramco, minimizing the use of scarce and valuable resources has always been a fundamental component of how we run our operations. I'll give you just 3 quick examples on how the company started back even in the 1970s. Where we've built the largest water desalination facility in the world to basically avoid using fresh groundwater for us to pressurize the reserves in order to produce our oil. We, and this is not a fact known to many people, we in Aramco, when we look at investment decisions, we penalize the economics of every investment if it uses fresh natural water. So we divert them away from using that. As a matter of fact, when we started our unconventional gas development, the one challenge that we posed to the development team was simple. You are to attain prices or costs that are more competitive than the North American shale developments without using fresh groundwater. And only when the team was able to achieve that, we actually authorized such investments. Going forward, however, with circularity, like many of our colleagues and their firms here, absolutely, we're also aligned with the concept of circularity. We look at the reduction, recycling, reuse of carbon, and we also happen to have experience in some of this. We about 10 years or so ago, we've experimented with the first carbon capture and sequestration utilization project. The low carbon intensity position that we enjoy is a testament to the efficiency of our operations, how we can actually minimize energy, to your point earlier, as well as emissions by efficient operators. And going forward on technology, and this is to your point, direct air capture is going to be an area where a lot of us will have to concentrate our investments and concentrate our attention on, because I think there lies a very important key for decarbonization of a lot of the energy companies or any of these hard-to-abate sectors.
Yeah, thank you. And I don't know, François, if you want to build on the thinking, or how does circularity affect your business strategy at TotalEnergies? Is there something that changes sustainability strategy these days?
Yes, of course, and I agree. We have a role to play as a multi-energy company. I take the example of SAF that Laura brought up. SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuel. It's very important to make a competitive SAF. So you have different technologies today. One, I would say the most effective one is based on waste and residues. So you process waste and residues like used cooking oil or animal fat, and out of it, you process that in a unit like an oil refinery. It's the same kind of unit, and at the end you have SAF. And that kind of SAF, airlines are ready to buy. If you come with a SAF 10 times more expensive as the kerosene, they won't buy. So we really have to keep the competitiveness in mind. We can achieve that through SAF. Of course, it depends on each country. You have regulations behind that, but we need also the incentive of regulators, to incentivize the airline to blend. I think it's really a multi-partite project, and it's the same for plastic recycling. We are driven also by the final customers. They really want us to have more recycled products in the product we sell, in the pellets we sell, that is further transformed and that further used as a recipient that at the end brand owners will use for their packaging or for any other use. So it's very important to say, okay, in my car there is this % of recycled polymer. So we need this, all together to walk along. I think on recycling of polymers there are very good technologies now in mechanical recycling. It works well. We can sell products 100% made from mechanical recycled polymer. On chemical or more advanced recycling, still developing, but there are some projects. We have also different projects. And our refinery in the kingdom here, Sato, with Saudi Aramco, has just got its HEC plus certifications for pyrolysis plastic processing. So it's first step like that we progress. We use existing assets to process, to start doing some circular economy. And I really believe that it's very efficient in terms of cost. Because if at the end the product is too expensive, nobody will buy it. So yes, we are part of it.
I think, and you're all making a similar point, like you're smart in designing circular strategies, but what we also really need is consumer participation, and that's something we're kind of often, I think, forgetting, that each of us is having an influence on things, and by making our own choices, we're creating incentives for businesses to deliver kind of sustainable products. But that's just as a wrap up on this second topic, and maybe now my idea was to say, okay, we try to find ways to minimize like current and future emissions, and now we can basically try to figure out and look back and say, hey, what if we could reduce past emissions, and are there technologies around that help to reverse some of the past effects and or some of the past environmental footprints like waste dumps and things like that. So basically, maybe again, Ashraf, if you want to say a few words on the role of technology in addressing the carbon challenge or this challenge more broadly, and do you see a role for Saudi Aramco in the net zero journey of the global economy?
Like I mentioned earlier, I think technology will be without a doubt the main catalyst for us to be able to decarbonize, our operations in Saudi Aramco, and that goes for many of the companies represented today. Technology will also allow us to identify new applications that will allow us to capture carbon. The issue with carbon, once you've captured it, what do you do with it? You either have to hide it or convert it to something. And I think technology can help with reduction of cost. Technology can help with converting carbon into other uses, or perhaps bring in some of the costs related to the sequestration of carbon at a dramatically much lower prices. You know, CCS and direct air capture are good examples of established technologies versus promising future technologies. I think direct air capture is not a technology that energy industry alone should invest in. It's a team sport. Everybody will have to, I think, invest a lot of money, provide for opportunities for advancements in platforms like this. But some of the known technologies and means today, like carbon capture and sequestration, that also deserves a lot of attention. You know, today there's probably 16 or 20 projects that are ongoing that will add 50 million tons to the existing 40 million tons that we sequester from carbon today. Where for us as a world to accomplish net zero by 2050, CCS will have to grow by 200 times for us to be able to achieve net zero as companies and countries. How is that going to happen? Am I going to get from 15 projects today to close to $4 trillion of investments by 2050? So there's a lot that has to happen from technologies, even unproven ways, that has to be demonstrated on how can I bring my cost of capture and sequestration down for us really to have any meaningful progress to net zero commitments.
Well, maybe François, again, if you want to build on these arguments, or do you see a potential for carbon capture and storage technologies to eliminate footprints from the past, and maybe to build on Ashraf's point also, what do you do with the carbon? Even if you capture it, is there a use for this material?
Thank you. So I fully agree with what Ashraf said. CCS is a way to further decarbonize our operations at first for our customers also. Secondly, so we have some projects in the North Sea to sequestrate CO2. And already some customers have applied, to store through that field, so in its northern line, to store there also some the CO2 they emit. I think that what's important is the economy of scale, is to be able to do it in an cost-effective way. For sure, North Sea for European countries is very well placed. Here in the Kingdom, we see in Jubail, in the eastern part, there's really a potential also for CCS. We have an asset there we want to develop. We know, I'm sure that in 10 years, in 5-10 years, there will be a pipeline of CO2, and I will be able to capture the CO2 of my operations, put it in the pipe, and get it sequestrated, and further abate CO2 emissions. So this, we are to buy, I would say, low carbon hydrogen, because it has been produced through a blue hydrogen, for instance, and the carbon would have been sequestrated. So I'm sure that in the Kingdom, typically there's a good fit for further decarbonization. And in terms of uses of CO2, I think we see many applications, so it's good to see innovation, new technologies, good projects. What I see as difficulty today is the price of that product, because it's still expensive projects, at least 10 times the product itself costs 10 times compared to the equivalent fossil, so we still need to further develop the technology. We talk about e-fuels, CO2 plus hydrogen to make whatever, methanol, e-methanol for vessels, or e-fuels or e-SAF, whatever. So it's still expensive, and it's important that we further through technology, innovation, R&D, that we further develop those technologies. We need them. I would say it's for next decade, how I see it. But we need now to work on it, to develop pilots, to develop, improve the technologies, to better integrate.
Well, thank you. And I think the interesting discussion we had about energy positive buildings now, the question is, can you do something like carbon positive buildings in construction today, Antoine?
Today, the easiest way to do it is by taking the CO2 that's, captured and reinjected inside the concrete or some other construction material. Actually, why concrete? Because concrete is the biggest emitter through the whole supply chain. Just to know that to produce 1 ton of concrete, you produce 600 kilograms of CO2, which is a lot. So, but we believe, the best way to optimize the CO2 emission is just simply not to emit it. So, a lot of research is being done today especially with cement manufacturers and also other materials, to do CO2-free material or products. Today, yeah, the technology still has a lot to do with this. As Ashraf said earlier, we have a lot to do with all those partners, but I believe within 10 years we will reach to a place where we can do a full building, with just, I'd say, 10% of the CO2 emissions that we have today. It's something that's feasible. In some countries, it depends, sure, the area. Here, we are talking about concrete buildings, we can talk about metallic buildings, and here a lot of research being done for the metallic structure. Some other areas we can use simply wood buildings. With a wood building, we can reduce our emission to 80% easily. So, yeah, again, it's the construction industry would help to absorb part of the CO2, but I believe the best that we avoid emission in the construction industry.
Wonderful. Now, back to Cyril. Basically, you mentioned before that you can take out plastic from the landfills and do some new things with it. And it's kind of a provocative question. Can you see landfills as the new mines, basically? Is there, like when you think about all these devices that are kind of stored in landfills, is there some way to extract these resources again today?
The idea is not to take the plastic out of the landfill, is to sort it before it goes to the landfill.
Yeah.
But talking about landfill, and actually I should talk about dump site rather than landfill many times. And you know that those dump sites are responsible for 10% of the greenhouse emission today. And 50% of the gases that come out from the dump sites is methane, and methane is 28 times more impactful than CO2. So we have a huge problem regarding the landfill. What is the solution? And it is a subject that has been somehow forgotten by all the financing world institutions so far. They are much more dedicated in potable water, in wastewater. I'm talking about my field of activity, obviously. And I believe that nowadays they are moving to transforming those dump sites into green landfills. What does it mean? It means that capturing the methane that is produced by the landfill and produce either electricity or use it to reinject it in the gas network where there is a gas network, and at the same time treating the leakage, the water that would come under the landfill in order not to pollute the soils. And those are two actions that are very much needed. Obviously, in the developing countries rather than in the developed one, but those are the ones that need the more help. And even in a country as developed as the Kingdom, there is still a lot to do regarding the transformation into from the landfill into the energy production or creation of new recycled material. And the Kingdom has set up a very ambitious program towards 2030 in order to avoid almost 90% of the landfill construction, and then try to reach 90% of landfill diversion, which is quite ambitious, I would say. And finally, I would like to talk about carbon finance, because I think it's something that is important. Carbon finance can help building new assets. When we lack some financing regarding the landfills, and we are currently working in order to achieve this credit carbon certification in one of our what we call a blessed example in Meknes in Morocco, where we have reached this level of maturity of a landfill, and we hope that with the help of the financing institution we can develop much more those projects.
All right, thank you so much. Now to close this topic, maybe Nora Marie, what about green technologies on the horizon? Where do you see the roadblocks preventing those technologies to scale today?
I think Ashraf and François, you both made a similar point, right? How do you get to that scale? Price is still clearly the issue. I think the irony here is that in the end of the day, to get to that scale, you need to make sure that the innovators in that space have the dry powder to make that happen. Now here's the dirty secret, right? The appetite for scalable technologies is actually not matched by where funding goes in the early stages. And so we can all talk about wanting to have and deploy scalable technologies if 80% of capital in the venture capital space goes to the 5 top tech sectors that only make up 20% of global greenhouse gas emissions. We kind of haven't solved the matter in the early stages because we won't get from X to Y. So I would say, Antoine, you mentioned this earlier, right? Sustainable buildings and construction. 39% of global greenhouse gas emissions, 8% cement and steel alone, but only 4% of capital in the early stages actually goes to innovations in that space, like green cement and steel. So clearly, if we keep allocating to sectors that are, feel-good investments, I would almost call them, 59% goes to software and e-mobility, like e-scooters and car-sharing apps. All really great investments, but if you do the carbon math, they don't actually move the needle on the climate crisis. We need more sovereign funds, we need more corporates to invest into deep tech in the earlier stages, because CO2 is a molecule, right? And you can't blockchain it away, you can't machine learn it away, you can't e-scooter it away, unfortunately. And so maybe this is a plea also from my side to make that push happen for everyone here.
Well, thank you. And before closing this discussion, maybe, I don't know if you want to react on one of each other's statements here, like compliment some thoughts. Anyone?
I'll probably go. So I think, this panel is a great testament on how important energy transition and net zero is, but we should never underestimate the complexity of the transition. If the recent events in Europe taught us anything, it told us that energy security is a fundamental component. Energy affordability is also an important metric, but also we should always consider the voices that are not usually present in these venues, which are those poor countries that need their own right for economic prosperity and development. Today, the facts tell us there's close to 1 billion people with no access to electricity. There are billions of people that want to emerge into middle-class families, and they also want to afford good things like many of us want and aspire to have. All of this will come with additional demand, and we have to understand and acknowledge that we should never abandon investment in conventional sources of energy and move into renewables in just such a rush, because the scale is not there, the investment is not there, the infrastructure is also not there. So I think a balanced narrative on how do we transition into net zero economies and achieve our plans is very important, and that can only happen when you've got all stakeholders involved in the same dialogue. You want the industry, you want the funding, and you want the policymakers to actually work as a team for you to have an effective and an orderly energy transition.
I think that's a pretty good statement to close this panel. It kind of brings together a lot of interesting thought, and I, at this stage, would really like to thank you for your great contributions to this discussion. I hope, their thinking will inspire you to think about ways forward, because we need to find ways to, deal with planetary boundaries, but we have all these constraints. Ashraf and the other panelists mentioned technology, business opportunities, demand side. There's an interplay of all that stuff, and you see clever government regulation can make a difference. So bringing all the stakeholders together and create a dialogue, I think, is the path forward. But on the other hand, my message is still there. Sustainability has to be a key part in any business model design. I think we owe it to our future generations and the planet. And well, I would like to thank you again for being here with us today, and enjoy the rest of this beautiful conference. Thank you.